All right, let's get started. We'll pray first. Father, thank you for bringing us all together this morning. Thank you for allowing us this nice, peaceful morning to study your word. I ask that you use your word to minister to our spirits today and have us take out of it every bit that you would teach us this morning through your spirit. And we ask that in your name. Amen. All right, so we last time we finished the book of Judges. We're going to keep going forward for the time. So the next book is Ruth. Our study on Ruth is going to be only today. So we're not going to go super in depth on anything, but we can still cover pretty much the entire book in one day. There are some interesting kind of fun little tidbits about the book of Ruth. There is only one book in the entire Old Testament that's named after a Gentile. That is Ruth. Some would say it's the only book in the Bible named after a Gentile. The other discussion is Luke in the New Testament on whether or not he was a Hellenistic Jew or a Gentile that had converted. Otherwise, Ruth is our Gentile book, especially in the Old Testament. There's only two books in the whole Bible named after women. Ruth is one of those. The other one is Esther, also in the Old Testament. So our book of Ruth is going to cover 11 years, an 11-year section in the book of, during the period of Judges. The time that the book of Judges was going is the same time period that the book of Ruth is going. If we remember the end of last time we studied the last, 5 chapters of Judges, where it was talking about these two Levites. And the last 3 chapters, we're talking about the big war that was caused after what happened to the Levites' concubine, and the Israelites fought each other and almost eliminated the tribe of Benjamin. In the time period of the book of Judges, that battle is actually before any of the Judges, even though it's at the end of the book. The time for it is at the beginning of Judges, the period of the Judges. Ruth, the book of Ruth, is going to happen after that. So all of our stuff that we looked at last time, where the Benjamites were almost wiped out by the other Israelite tribes, this all happened about 150 years before Ruth. But Ruth is happening it seems like maybe right before when Deborah is a judge, and after when Ehud, the left-handed Benjamite, was a judge. She's going to fall right in there in the area of Shamgar, who we didn't really get much information on. So this book is going to happen during that time. So there haven't been any judges raised up for the most part yet. Othniel would have been through, Ehud would have been through, Shamgar maybe. But we're very early during the time of Judges. Everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. Remember that book? It was a very down heavy roller coaster, up a little, down a lot, up a little, down a lot. Ruth is the other way. It's going to start off like it belongs in the book of Judges. Not great, but the end of it is finally some good news. So as we go into it, around Judges chapter 4 is when Ruth starts or takes place. The name Ruth, and then we're gonna look at a lot of different names in this one briefly as we go through, but these names have meanings and they're fun and they mean something. The meanings mean something, right? So Ruth, the name itself, means friend or friendly or friendship. That's going to matter. We'll see how appropriate that is. Ruth is also the only book in Scripture that is named specifically after somebody in Christ's genealogy. Ruth herself will be in the line of Christ. Her children will go all the way down to the birth of the Messiah. So that's interesting. But she is not in the beginning of the book. We're going to look at, first off, a woman named Naomi, who is Ruth's mother-in-law. That's where the book is going to start. And the book is really, it's 4 chapters long, but it's really just 2 love stories. There's a love story between Ruth and Naomi, and there's a second love story between Ruth and Boaz. Okay. And we're going to cover all that. So as we start, verse 1, in the days when the judges ruled, there was famine in the land, And a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. All right. So it's the very first verse starts off letting us know that there is a famine in the promised land. This man that's in Bethlehem has been struck by the famine, so he's leaving to go find food. Irony, Bethlehem means house of bread, right? And that is where the bread of life is going to be born later on after this, 1,000 years or more after this happens. Then the bread of life is born physically. But this is the house of bread, Bethlehem, having a famine. If we've paid attention, this is not a coincidence, right? They're being judged, it would seem like. But in verse 1 there, we see that his answer for this famine, for this man that is not named right now, his answer because of the famine in Bethlehem is to leave and go to Moab. That's how he's going to deal with the famine in Bethlehem. Leave and go to Moab. We might remember where Moab gets its name from. If we see here, we can see that Bethlehem and Jerusalem and Judah is all here on the west side. And then we have Moab over here on the east side. Now, if we remember where Moab gets its name from, and we should be familiar with Moab by this point, they're off and on pretty consistently enemies with the Israelites. The Moabites and the Israelites fight each other all the time. If we remember where Moab got its name from is when, and we actually covered a lot last week in Sodom and Gomorrah. So when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed and Lot went outside of there to a smaller village, eventually ends up with just him and his daughters. His daughters committed a sin to raise up offspring in Lot's name. And when they did that, one of the children born through that sinful relationship was Moab. The other one was Ben-Ami, which that one doesn't really sound like anything. You find out that the Ammonites were named after him. So the Moabites came from one of the sons. The Ammonites came after the other one of the sons. Israel's constantly at war with both of these people groups. Even though they came directly from Lot, they were out of a sinful relationship, and it caused problems. So this is where the Moabites came from. That's where it's located. If we look here, we can even see Ammon up there a little bit further north. So we see the Ammonites had this land up here. The Moabites had the land down here. And we see that Israel is on the west side of the Dead Sea. And then right above the Dead Sea, we see, there's a little arrow there. That's the Jordan River that goes up from the Dead Sea. Or actually, the Dead Sea goes down, or the Jordan River goes down into the Dead Sea. All right, verse 2. The name of the man, so we're talking about the man that was Bethlehem of Judah, that left because of the famine. Okay, the name of the man was Elimelech. That might sound kind of familiar. Elimelech. And the name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. And they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem and Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. Now, Elimelech sounds a lot like Abimelech, but they are different people. If we remember Abimelech, his name means my father is king. Remember, Gideon named him that after he said he didn't want to be king. He named his son, my father is king. Elimelech, using the same word structure, instead of my father is king, it is God is my king. So that's a strong name. It's a good name. His wife's name was Naomi, which means pleasant. It's a very good name also. The sons' names, though, they weren't good names. Their sons' names mean weak, tired, sick. And the other one means to stop, to come to an end, or to be finished, death. So sickly and deathly were in essence what their names meant. All right, verse 3. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Now, he was the Israelite. Okay, Elimelech was the Israelite from Bethlehem in Judah, and he went to Moab. He died there. All right. She was left, Naomi was left with just her and her 2 sons. Okay. Verse 4, these took Moabite wives. They weren't supposed to, right? The Israelites are to marry the Israelites, right? Now, you could marry a foreigner if they joined into the Israelite culture and became separated like the Israelites were supposed to be, then everything was good. That's not what's happening here. They are in a foreign land marrying foreigners. They're not supposed to do this because it seems like the foreigners probably still have the pagan culture that goes along with that, right? So it's not advised. So they took the Moabite wives. The name of one of them was Orpah, not Oprah. It was Orpah. And the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion died, wickly and sickly, deathly. They both died. So that the women were left with the two sons and her husband. So Naomi now, so when she goes there, it's Naomi, her husband, and her two sons. Now, her husband and her two sons are all dead. It's Naomi and her two new daughters-in-law. Okay. And we see that they were there about 10 years. They didn't have any children in 10 years. If we learn anything from especially the patriarchal stories, they're going to be having children in this time span if they're able. So we only an assumption, although it leads to what seems to be a safe assumption, that they may have not been able to have children. So they travel to Moab. Naomi's husband dies. Her two sons marry Moabite women. Then Naomi's sons also die. It leaves Naomi, who is a Hebrew woman, and two daughters-in-law who are both Moabite women. Right. If we remember back in Genesis, so there's a 10-year stretch that they were there. Right. If you remember back in Genesis, the Lord talks to Abraham, says you'll have a son, and they wait. And then after 10 years, Sarah convinces Abraham to go ahead and have that son with Hagar instead of waiting on God. This seems like it was following a similar trajectory. 10 years, no children. Now, there's not that same deliverance exactly, but it's close. But right now, the main problem is they're in a foreign land. A Hebrew woman and two Moabite women are in Moab, but there's no men. And so in this culture, there's no way to provide. If the husband dies, it's for the sons and their families to take care of the woman, Naomi. Now that they're also dead, we have three women with no men to support them. Usually, so in those times, that would be, it would be a extreme situation. It would be dire, right? There's nobody working. There's no food. There's no provider. There's no safety. A widow with no heirs can't support themselves. Naomi is too old to remarry. So she's kind of stuck now. She doesn't have sons and she's too old to get another husband. So that's bad for her. Generally, women with no children that were widowed would have to turn to either prostitution or begging. There really wasn't a lot of other options. But in order to avoid starvation, they would have to find whatever they could do to get by. But we find out in the next verse that the Lord had provided food back in the house of bread, while Naomi and her daughter-in-laws were in the foreign land of Moab. Back in Jerusalem, we have food. So verse 6, then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her two daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord, and she uses the divine name, so may Yahweh deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So what she's saying is, you guys go back home. May Yahweh bless you the way that you have blessed the dead, being their former husbands, and also their mother-in-law, when she said me, Naomi herself. They have treated them so well that she wishes Yahweh's blessings on the daughters-in-law. Verse 9, the Lord grant, and she uses the name again, Yahweh grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. So she's recommending they go get remarried. Then she kissed them and lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands. So do you guys remember talking about the levirate marriage, where if the husband dies, the oldest remaining brother of his would raise up a family in his name through the wife, right? That's what she's referring to. She says, have I yet sons in my womb that may become your husband? She's saying, I can't have any more kids, so I can't give you a levirate husband, right? Verse 12, turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even I should have a husband this night and should bear a son, would you then wait until they were grown? So what she's saying is, even if I wasn't so old, would you wait however many years for them to be old enough to marry, right? You can't do that. Verse 13, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of Yahweh has gone out against me. So Naomi's having a pity party. She's telling the two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, go back to Moab, go live with your families. I'm sorry for your sake that God has afflicted me, right? So Naomi is under the impression that the Lord is judging her, which maybe he was judging her, in that caught kind of innocently in the crossfire was these two daughters-in-law, because Naomi's judgment would have been to lose all the men in her family, in her eyes. But also in her eyes, that took the men away from the daughters-in-law who weren't under judgment. This is what Naomi's thinking. Do we remember the levirate marriage? Do we remember that's also called the kinsman redeemer? The kinsman redeemer. So a kin to somebody is a relative, right? And then a redeemer is a redeemer, right? So who's the greatest redeemer that has ever been? It's Christ. Yes. So we will actually see how this person, this kinsman redeemer in this story, is actually a shadow, a type of Christ in that aspect as we move forward, because he's going to redeem a lot of things in this story. So Naomi feels like the hand of the Lord is against her. Verse 14, then they, this is the daughters-in-law, lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Now, Orpah, there's mixed definitions on this, but one of the definitions for that name is back of the neck, which might be the last thing that Naomi saw of her, might be where she got that name, because this is the end of Orpah's story. She kisses Naomi and goes back to Moab, presumably to live with her Moabite family, and we don't hear any more about her. But verse 15, this is after Ruth clung to Naomi. Verse 15, and she said, see, this is Naomi talking, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. So we have the Hebrew woman, Naomi, still trying to get rid of the Moabite women to send them back to Moab, and says, look, Orpah, your sister-in-law, has gone back to her land, which she told her to do, or asked her to do, but she's gone back to her gods also. And Naomi seems perfectly fine with that. These Moabite people should go back to their Moabite gods, it would seem that she thinks. That's not good. Regardless of what culture they were raised in, they should not be asked to return to their gods, unless they're returning back to the only true God. So go back to your familiar people with your familiar gods. And then Naomi tells Ruth to do the same thing. Verse 16, but Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to refrain from following you. If you highlight or underline or whatever in the Bible, this is the spot. This is the one to highlight. Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Okay, that's beautiful. There's a lot in those, 3 verses? There's a lot. So remember, Naomi is trying to get Ruth to go back. I feel bad for you. Just go back to your home place of Moab. fit back in with your family and your gods there. Get remarried. I'm sorry that my son died that you were married to. Go remarry and have a good life. I'm going to go back to Israel and sulk. But Ruth says, where you go, I will go. In other words, I'm just going to follow you wherever you go, right? That makes sense. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Okay, so we're going to live together too. I'm going to follow you everywhere and we're going to live together. Your people shall be my people. Okay, so I'm not a Moabite anymore. You're an Israelite going back to Israel. Your people are my people. I'm now an Israelite going back to Israel. Okay, in essence, your people shall be my people and your God, my God. Ruth doesn't want to go back to the Moabite gods. She probably realizes that it's fake. It's a idolatrous thing. She's probably been around Naomi and maybe Elimelech enough to know there is a real God and he's in Israel. He's not in Moab, but your God is going to be my God. But she keeps going further, right? She's going to spend her whole life with her. But verse 17, where you die, I will die. In other words, Naomi, who is just by age alone expected to die a decent amount first, a generation ahead of Ruth. Ruth says, wherever you die, I'm going to stay there and I'm still going to be with those people and I'm still going to live there and I'm going to die there too. Okay. And there I will be buried. So I'm not going to stay until you die and then go back home. I'm not going to stay until you die and wait for myself to die and then have them take my bones back home. You remember how Joseph and others had their bones carried back to the promised land if they died out of the country. Ruth said, no. I'm going to go back with you. And these new people that are also now my people, I'm going to get buried there too. I'm going to live as long as you live there. I'm going to, and whenever I die, it's going to be wherever you die. And then I'm going to get buried there also. So she's fully leaving everything else behind and coming into the promised land with Naomi. And then this is Ruth talking. This is a Gentile. May Yahweh do so to me and more, if anything but death parts me from you. Okay. So we have a Gentile making an oath using the divine name Yahweh, talking to the Hebrew woman. Okay. There's a lot going on there. But Ruth is fully on board. She wants nothing to do with her old life. She is going into this new life, which seems like it might be very hard, a very hard life for these two widows going back to this place. Okay. But that's what she's chosen. That's a lot of devotion, right? That's a lot of loyalty. She walked away from everything in her culture, even her land, right? She left her country. She crossed the Dead Sea. They're in a different country now. And she says, I'm going to stay there forever. Naomi could die the next day and Ruth would be bound by this promise, right? So she leaves behind the old people and the old gods, joins the new people in the promised land, the home of the living God. And then on behind one, verse 19. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem, the house of bread. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. Because of who? Because of Ruth and Naomi. But they've been gone Naomi's been gone for 10 years, and the people don't know who Ruth is. But the whole town stirred up because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? And she said to them, do not call me Naomi. What's Naomi mean? Pleasant, right? Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara. What's Mara mean? Bitter. Don't call me pleasant. Call me bitter. Okay. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Right. So she feels that all of this is happening because God is stretching out his hand against her. Verse 21, I went away full. In other words, I left with a full family, me, my husband, my two sons. And then she says, and the Lord, she uses the name again, and Yahweh brought me back empty. Me, my husband, my two sons, and he brought me back with none of those guys. But I did have this woman that I picked up while I was there. I brought her back, which still leaves me empty, apparently. Why call me Naomi when Yahweh has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? It sounds kind of towards the end of Job there, right? He's not feeling so pleasant anymore, but she doesn't lose her faith. Verse 22, so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Okay, we're going to see a couple different harvests in this book. So at the beginning of the barley harvest, the two women come back in. Now, what we might wonder is, are they just going to be homeless? Where are they going to stay? Well, so keep in mind that the land has already been allotted. So they do still have her Elimelech, her dead husband, his land is still in Israel. Now, they did sojourn to Moab to look for food, but they still have the land in Israel. So that's where they're headed to, is his land, okay? Before we start chapter 2, we're going to refresh real quick on a couple things. Reaping, when it talks about reaping, that's the normal harvest. That's harvesting the fields, okay? So sometimes while you're harvesting, you missed a spot, okay? You're grabbing stuff and there's still some hanging there, or you're grabbing stuff and something falls. You're harvesting. Sometimes you miss, sometimes you drop, you leave it. If you miss something in the fields, you leave it. If you drop something, you leave it, okay? The person that comes by and picks that up, that's gleaning, okay? So harvesting is that first gather through. Gleaning is kind of the scrounging of the scraps, okay? Do we remember the Gideon story where he takes only 300 men? He starts off with thousands of guys, and God keeps whittling down his army until he gets down to 300 guys. Do you guys remember that story? And then after they kill the two armies, defeat the two armies, the kings are running away. And then they call the other tribe. The other tribe comes in and they kill the kings, but they're mad that they weren't part of the original war, right? And then, actually, we have it right here. So in Judges chapter 8, verse 2, Gideon, because the other Israelites are mad at him, Gideon says, "What have I done in comparison with you? Isn't the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer?" And what that meant was Abiezer, which was Gideon's clan, they fought the battle with the your run of the mill soldiers, if we can say that. But the kings were killed by the Ephraimites. And that's what he's talking, the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim. In other words, you guys got to kill the kings. There's much more honor in that. All we did was the main battle, right? That's what Gideon said to appease those guys. That's the difference between gleaning and harvesting. It's taken from the field reference. So in the fields, the context of the fields, we see a few different times in the law, starting in Leviticus 23:22. These are rules, right? Leviticus is the law given to the Levites. Okay, so there are the rules. It's the rule book, case laws. So Leviticus says, when you reap the harvest, okay, you shall not reap your field up to the edge, nor shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You leave them for the poor and the sojourner, the traveler, the foreigner. You leave that stuff. Don't pick it up. If it goes to waste, it goes to waste. You leave it, okay? Finishes the verse, I am Yahweh your God, okay? Deuteronomy says similar. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the traveler, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over them again. In other words, you try once. You harvest. You try to harvest once. You don't sit there and scrape everything off of it. You try to harvest once. Whatever's left is left. Okay. Do not go over them again. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not strip it afterwards. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. Right. So the Israelites have specific rules for how to harvest. Even. Okay.
What's a sojourner?
A sojourner is a traveler or a foreigner.
Oh.
Yeah. So they have these specific rules, and the rules are in place so that nobody is left out in the promised land. Nobody will starve if everybody's following the rules. The people that have fields will harvest their fields, and the people that are sojourners, the travelers, foreigners, fatherless, widows, in other words, the poor people that or people that don't have providers or have lost their provider can go behind. Now, it's not a welfare program. It's not a free handout. They still have to come take it. They still have to do the gleaning. But after the harvesting is done, these people are allowed to come in and glean. In that way, they won't starve. Okay, these are rules put in place by God. Now we go to chapter 2. Now, Naomi had a relative of her husband's. Okay. Her husband is dead. What would the relative of Naomi's dead husband be called? This is a kinsman redeemer. Okay. Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she went out and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Now, keep in mind that Ruth and Naomi are back at Elimelech, the dead husband's land, right? They're back where they used to live 10-ish years ago. Okay. They get back there. And what's Ruth say to Naomi? Should we go begging? Should we go find one of the pagan temples to try to raise money? No, she says, allow me to go work, right? Ruth said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. So she's saying, I'm going to go try to find somebody to let me work in their fields if you'll let me. Let me go try to find a field to work in so that we don't starve, right? Ruth is looking to find food. Verse 4, now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, may Yahweh be with you. And they said to him, may Yahweh bless you. Okay, so Boaz, who owns field or fields, comes out. So this is the owner of the field coming out to his hired workers. In some places, they're going to be called slaves, some servants. These are the hired workers in the field that work for Boaz. So when the boss comes to the field where the farmers are, we get shop talk. In the shop talk in Boaz's field, in his factory, the shop talk is, may Yahweh be with you. And the shop talk that he gets back is, may Yahweh bless you. Okay. That's a different kind of shop than what we might be used to. But we know what kind of guy owns the field. Okay. So we can tell that we're dealing now. Again, don't forget, this is happening during the time of Judges. So don't forget what kind of guy we're dealing with during this time period that's still loyal. Okay. Verse 5. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers said, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came and has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Okay, so we see that after Ruth asked permission from Naomi to go find a field to work in, she then found a field and asked permission from the guy in charge of that field if she could glean after the reapers went through. Okay, and he gave her permission to do that. And she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So Ruth is a worker. Okay. Boaz notices that. Verse 8, Boaz says to Ruth, now listen, my daughter. Now, she was not his daughter. She's younger than him. Okay. That's why he speaks like this. Now, listen, my daughter, do not go and glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Stop. This is the guy that owns the field telling this foreign woman that's gleaning in his field, don't bother going to any other fields. Now, Ruth has the option. She can go to any field that anybody will let her work in. And Boaz says, don't bother looking. Just stay in my field. Stay by the women that are working in my field, and you can just keep working. Okay. You'll be safe here, is what he's saying. Verse 9, let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Haven't I told the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn, right? So there's some people that are harvesting and reaping. There's some people that are drawing water. And Boaz says, just follow the guys that are harvesting and glean as much as you want. The guys that are gathering water, whenever you get thirsty, just go over there and get some water from those guys. Okay. And I've told everybody not to touch you. All right. We have our first HR policy. Okay. Verse 10, then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, Boaz, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. Yahweh repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by Yahweh, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So Boaz tells her, she says, Boaz, why are you treating me so good? I'm a foreigner coming in here to basically just take your food. Why are you treating me so good? And he says, I've heard what you've done for Naomi. I heard that you left everybody behind to treat her well. All right, everybody knows who Naomi is, apparently. And I've heard what you've done to treat her well. And I'm asking Yahweh to bless you for that. And also a full reward to be given to you by Yahweh, who is the God of Israel, who under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Okay. Then she, Ruth, said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. Right? She doesn't work for him, but he's treating her every bit as good as the people that do work for him, or even better. Right? So like Naomi did before, Boaz also wishes the blessings of Yahweh, specifically by name, on Ruth. Because of how she treated Naomi. Boaz told her not to bother going to other fields. She can glean all she wants from there. Work with the women, stay with them. Told the male workers, don't touch, don't bother. Okay. Do we remember last time when we were looking at Judges, how the men of Benjamin treated even the other Israelites? Remember those last 3 chapters, all that stuff happened with the concubine and the wars and all that. That was Israelites killing and fighting against Israelites, right? After the Levite passed up staying with the Gentiles and Jebus and intentionally stayed in the Israelites' territory to be safer, okay? He thought he was going to get this kind of treatment, all right? But there wasn't any to be had. Not last week. There is here. Boaz is treating this stranger the way that he's supposed to, and even quite a bit more. Right. So verse 14, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, Ruth, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So the boss, the owner of the field, brings lunch to her already made. Right. You're not harvesting bread. Right. There's a lot of work involved between the grain and the bread. Right. So come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. Well, she's not starving today, right? Verse 15, when she rose up to glean again, right? You finish in lunchtime, you go back to work. She rose up to glean. Boaz instructed his young men, the reapers, instructed them, let her glean even among the sheaves. In other words, she doesn't even have to stay in the stuff that you've already harvested. Let her go into the full sheaves and pull whatever. But he's not done. Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. In other words, no dirty looks, no dirty words. Don't say anything, right? If you're going to get out of line, you're in the wrong field. Okay. Do not reproach her. Verse 16, and also pull out some from the bundles, the stuff they've already gathered. Right? Pull out some from the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean. In other words, the stuff you've already gathered, go ahead and grab some of that back out and dump it back on the ground. That way, when she comes by with her basket, she can just pick that up too. Okay. You're not giving her a handout. She still has to work for it, but it just so happens that all this food is everywhere. Okay. So she got up to continue working. Boaz made sure she had plenty to gather. Verse 17. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Well, when did she get there? Morning, right? She was there all morning. Boaz noticed her. They stopped. They had some lunch. Then she stayed until evening. So the entire day she's in the field, this woman. Okay. Then, right. So it's evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned. So she kept working. She stayed in the field till evening. Then she went back home and she had to start processing it. Right. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. We'll come back to that. And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law, that's Naomi, saw what she had gleaned. And she also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. That's lunch. So she had so much left over from lunch that she took her doggy bag home. She gives that to Naomi, and she brings back an ephah of barley. An ephah is about 5 gallons of dried barley, about 30 pounds worth. Enough food for these two women for several weeks from one day. Okay. So also 30 pounds, right? We need to realize the amount of work that this woman was doing, toting around. So it's 30 pounds plus whatever she was carrying it in, right? And she's having to move through the fields all day. You know, it might have started off at 10 pounds and she's filling it and moving and filling it and moving. And then she's filling and moving with 15 pounds and filling and moving with 20 pounds, sun up until evening. Okay. Carrying around this thing, adding weight and keep moving. She was working. That was work. Okay. It also shows how generous Boaz was, that she got multiple weeks worth of food from one day's worth of work in his field. Okay. Quite a haul. Verse 19. And her mother-in-law said to her, that's Naomi, said to her, where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by Yahweh, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Stop there. Naomi has changed her tune from last chapter, right? Yahweh has reached out his hand against me. I left full. He brought me back empty, right? She's feeling very discouraged. But now, after she sees this, blessed, may he be blessed by Yahweh, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. In other words, God is still taking care of me, Naomi, and you, Ruth, and is still using this situation to care for the dead, which would be the dead sons and the dead husband. How is God taking care of them? We'll come back to that. But Naomi recognizes it already. The last part of that verse, Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers, a kinsman redeemer, right? Now, a close relative to them is not a close relative to us. A close relative to us is brothers, cousins, uncles, aunts, close relatives. A close relative to them would be somebody from the same clan, okay? And it says Boaz is from the same clan as Elimelech, and that's why he's a close relative. Specifically, that's why he's a kinsman, or at least one of some potential kinsman redeemers. All right. So when she says the living or the dead, the widows and those they lost, Naomi doesn't feel bitter anymore that God's against her. She doesn't want to be called Mara anymore. She's back to Naomi. She's feeling pretty pleasant, right? She specifically uses the word redeemers on the last word of that verse, redeemer, the same word that is used to describe Christ, redeemer, the same word. Okay. Verse 21. And Ruth the Moabite said, besides Boaz said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. Right? Again, keep in mind, a bunch of guys working in a field and some foreign woman just comes kind of strolling in there by herself, widowed. It's not a safe situation, right? But she's safe. She says, it is good, lest in another field you be assaulted. Verse 23, so she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law, right? Boaz provided a safe place for Ruth to harvest. We see that she stayed there for 2 harvests, not 2 years, but 2 separate harvests, the wheat harvest, and the barley harvest. It moves us into chapter 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? That might be a little confusing. We'll get what she's saying, right? Naomi's telling Ruth, I need to find, you can't be out gathering every day, all day. You know, it's a seasonal thing. You need somebody to provide for you. So should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Verse 2, Is not Boaz our relative, our kinsman, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Stop there. What she's saying is the harvest is done. And now, also notice they're beating out wheat on a threshing floor again, right? See Gideon, mighty man of valor, right? This is where this is not how it would normally happen, but that's not the point of this. So Naomi notices that Boaz is out on the threshing floor, right? Winnowing the barley. She tells Ruth, go get prettied up, go put on your best dress, go take a shower, get dressed real nice and clean, maybe pull your hair back, put the thing on. She's telling her to get real niced up and then go see Boaz, but wait until he's finished eating and drinking. So don't interrupt his work. Wait till he's relaxed. Verse 4, but when he lays down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say, I will do. We'll stop there. Feet means feet. Okay? People try to twist this. Feet means feet. The rest of the chapter makes it obvious. Okay? Feet means feet. Verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he was drunk, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Stop. What does that mean? Right? They all knew exactly what it means. It's us that don't understand it without paying a little closer attention. She said, I'm Ruth, right? He couldn't tell who it was. It's midnight. She says, it's me. It's Ruth. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Ruth just proposed to Boaz. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. They know that a redeemer is a kinsman redeemer. And Ruth is asking Boaz to spread his wings over her, to shelter her, to be her covering, to be her husband. That's what she's proposing. Okay. Verse 10, and he, Boaz, said, may you be blessed by Yahweh, my daughter, for you have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after younger men, whether poor or rich. Stop. He's telling her that this kindness, her proposing to him, was nicer than the first kindness because she apparently was a looker and could have gone after a younger man, poor or rich, but she didn't. She chose him because he is a kinsman redeemer. Verse 11. And now, my daughter, this is not his daughter. She's just younger. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. So Boaz just accepted her wedding proposal. I will do for you all that you ask. I will redeem you. Okay. But verse 12. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. In other words, there's somebody closer on the family tree to Elimelech than Boaz. So that person, if we want to call it dibs, they have the first right to redeem Naomi and Ruth and the land. So there's somebody closer than I. Verse 13, remain tonight. In other words, stay here tonight. And in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as Yahweh lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. Stop there. He's telling her, no matter what, you're getting redeemed. Okay. So Ruth knows that she's going to be provided for and be safe from here on out, at least in this aspect. You will be redeemed, but there's somebody closer to me. So we have to talk to him first. If he will, then he will. If he will not, then I will. That way, you know, you're covered either way. Okay. As Yahweh lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before anyone could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. He doesn't want it known that she stayed there because it could give an image of impropriety. But as they said over and over and over, there wasn't any. She remained at his feet. Okay. So verse 15. And he said, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, Naomi, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. She replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. Okay, so she did not work for this barley. Okay, Boaz just gave her these 6 measures of barley. So there's a couple different ways we can look at it. It could have been, and is easily could be assumed, that he was just being nice to her. He gave her 6 cups of barley, right? Here, take this. Go back. Don't go back empty to Naomi. Take this barley back. It could also be that he was paying the bride price by sending the barley back to Naomi. We're never really told that. But either way, he's being very generous. Again, 6 more measures of barley that she gave back out, or that he gave back out to her. And then verse 18, Naomi says, just wait here until you hear how it turns out. The man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. Right. So Naomi, we can add all these tiny little clues together to think maybe Ruth might have been very pretty. Because Naomi is telling her he's going to try to handle this today. You proposed to him last night. He's going to try to lock it up. Okay. So he's going to try to handle it today. So chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. So if we remember, all of the business that takes place, if the town has a market, then it can be there also. But generally your business is going to be done at the city gate. Right? Because that's where everybody that's going by, whether they come into town or not, everybody's going to pass by the gate. So the business gets done at the gate. Okay. So Boaz is at the gate. He sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, and sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. Then Boaz said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech, right? Because they have to sell it because they don't have any, there's nobody to take the land. There are no male offspring, right? So this land is going to leave the family. Okay. So they're selling it. So they sat down. Naomi, who is come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Okay, so let's pay attention to what's going on. Boaz and whoever this other redeemer is, this closer redeemer, those 2 and 10 elders are at the city gate having a meeting. Okay. Boaz says, Naomi came back from Moab. She is selling her land, and there's nobody besides you to redeem it. And after you is me. In other words, he's saying, we're the only 2 and you get dibs. Okay. Now what it is, you buy this land and then you can have it. So if you want to redeem it and buy this land, you have first shot. If you don't want to, I have second shot. Okay. And the guy said, I will, right? Who doesn't want the land, right? Who would not want to just buy the land if you could? Verse 5, then Boaz said, the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite. In other words, you just agreed to buy the field, but the girl comes with the field. Ruth comes with. Okay. You also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. This is Levirate marriage. This is the kinsman redeemer. That's what we're looking at. Verse 6. Then the redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Okay. We need to figure out what that's about. So this guy originally wanted to redeem it when he thought it was just buying land. He wanted that. When he found out that Ruth came with the land because she is also to be redeemed. In other words, she is to have offspring raised up in her dead husband's name. All right. That is that man's duty to do to her if he accepts this. Okay. He said, I can't do that. He said, I'll take the land. I can't have the girl. So never mind, because it's a package. You have to take it all or nothing. So he says nothing. Okay. I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. So he must have already had a family, because if he had a family and then also raised up this other family with Ruth, his inheritance would be split between those two. Okay. So he says, I will not redeem it. So he passed, which puts Boaz back up the plate. Verse 7. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the manner of attesting in Israel. Stop there. That is the manner of doing it during this time period. Previously to this, the manner of doing it was you would take off that person's sandal and you would spit in their face. And then you would get your name changed to the one whose sandal was taken off or something like that. It was very humiliating to be the person who did not redeem somebody. Okay. In fact, I did hear that within the past handful of years, a lady actually took a kinsman to court over there recently because he refused to redeem her. So they are still practicing this. She did lose, but she tried. So they are still, at least to a point, practicing this. So anyways, this was the manner of attesting in Israel. Verse 8. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witness this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Okay. So now Boaz owns all of that stuff. Verse 10. Also, Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. In other words, they don't want Mahlon in his name to be forgotten forever. They want to raise up offspring in his name. Okay. You are witnesses this day. Verse 11, then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May Yahweh make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. There's a lot there. We're not going to get real deep in it. We have covered everything that's in there. So briefly, we are witnesses. May Yahweh make the woman who is coming into your house, that's Ruth. May Yahweh make Ruth like Rachel and Leah. Rachel and Leah had a lot of kids. 12 of those are the patriarchs, right? Rachel also had something else going on. Rachel was barren until God decided that she wasn't. Ruth, I believe, was barren until God decided that she wasn't. Verse 12, it says, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Does anybody remember that story? And we're not going to get into the details on that one, but it's along similar lines where Tamar, her husbands kept dying and she could not get any offspring. And Judah, although unintentionally, raised up for her offspring And what it ended up being Perez, who is also in the line of the Messiah. Okay. It's very cool how it all connects. Verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went to her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. So that verse ends why I think she was barren until God said she wasn't. Because 10 years she was married to Mahlon and had no children. She receives blessing, 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 blessing. She does all these things in the name of God and receives blessing, blessing, blessing. And then it says, the Lord gave her conception and she bore a son. So I believe she was barren until right here. And I believe she was barren for a reason until right here. Verse 14. Then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be Yahweh who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. And for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David, King David. Do we see where we're at in the story now? King David's grandpa only came because Ruth followed Naomi back and was blessed, and then meets Boaz and gets redeemed by Boaz. Boaz and Ruth have a child together, and that child is King David's grandpa, straight from the line of Christ. How about that? What a story. We finish up here. We have the genealogy going from Perez to David. Now, these are the generations of Perez. Again, Perez, born out of wedlock, born through a very sinful relationship, okay, through a kinsman redeemer accidentally. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. Jesse fathered David. All right. Through that line of redemption and salvation, Ruth got redeemed and saved physically and spiritually. That same line that we get redeemed and saved. Same line, straight from Christ all the way down. Because this woman left her old culture behind and decided to follow the God of Naomi, the God of Israel. It all started from that. If Elimelech and Naomi don't leave Jerusalem to go to Moab, if that doesn't happen, if Elimelech and both sons don't die, if that doesn't happen, if Ruth stays in Moab instead of coming back with Naomi, if Ruth decides to come back and pout instead of working in the fields, if she goes to a different field that's not Boaz's, there's so many different things if. But it just so happened, right? Do you remember that from Judges? It just so happened. Do you know what it just so happened means? It means God has providence. That means, like in Romans, God uses everything, good, bad, or indifferent, uses everything to accomplish his purpose. He used every single one of these decisions, any one of them that could have changed the whole thing, right? He used all of these decisions, boom, line of the Messiah from a Moabite. It doesn't matter where we're coming from as long as we come from there, right? And go towards the God of Israel, towards Yahweh, towards Jesus, right? Okay, we're going to stop there.